Mark Mullinax here, and welcome back to Power for the Peaceful. Our podcast this time treats verse 69 out of the 81 verses of Tao Te Ching, an episode called Befriending the Enemy Within. You know, the first casualty in war, they say, is truth. In this verse, we go for deeper awareness than that. The first casualty in war is truth, the truth about ourselves. So let's find out how.
When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. The sweet sound of the river as she moves over the stones. The same song that the blood in your body sings as it weaves around your bones. When you're listening, are you listening?
The minute you think you have the right to belittle others because you think you're better than them is the same minute you've proven you're worse. Joanne Alcayaga. By belittling others, we only show how little and shallow we are. Abhijit Naskar. To belittle, you have to be little. Khalil Gibran.
I am pleased and honored to be accompanied this time by Chad Smith, who introduces himself this way.
I'm the pastor and court jester of House of Mercy in Asheville, North Carolina.
That speaks volumes. I'll put his contact info in the show notes. Chad has seen a draft of today's episode, and he's prepared himself to be here to bring his deep clarity to our verse today, which I'm going to ask him to read right now.
Verse 69, the better strategy. Military specialists have this axiom: better to defend than to invade, better to retreat a foot than advance an inch. The secret here is advancing without a spectacle, rolling up one's sleeves without a display of arms, defeating without attacking, seizing but without weapons. There is no calamity greater than belittling one's enemy. You just lose your three virtues. Therefore, when two equally matched forces face off, the strategist of compassion prevails.
Thanks, Chad. Do you have any first impressions on this verse?
Yeah, what came to mind reading this is Dr. Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement. He is a great hero of mine, and in fact, at House of Mercy, I try to, the sort of the vision I had was to follow that movement, that civil rights movement, follow the Black church as an ally, really, as someone who is white and majority white congregation. But Dr. King, his method and his approach, which of course comes from his mentor Howard Thurman and Gandhi, is particularly your line here. The secret here is advancing without spectacle, rolling up one's sleeves without a display of arms, defeating without attacking, seizing but without weapons. You know, that's definitely what he embodied, what he incarnated, and then of course I would say he was following the way of Christ in this too. And you know, I couldn't help but think about the way, as it was called originally, the Christian movement, as something that, well, Christ himself on the cross, as I see it, is modeling this very thing. He's therefore, when two equally matched forces face off, the strategist of compassion prevails. So he's facing his enemies with raw compassion and facing hate with love. And to see how, I don't like the word successful really, but how that movement, which really began with just his mom and Mary Magdalene and another Mary and John, who was forced to be there really by Jesus. That's really where Christianity begins, at the foot of the cross, and to see what it became, and then I would say by in the 5th century, unfortunately begins to go off course actually that early, but still it became a force to be reckoned with, if you will. And I couldn't help but think about that reality and to see Christ himself as the embodiment as an individual of the Tao and what this is speaking to here.
Yeah, while he was on the cross, he did not blast his enemies. He prayed for them, had compassion upon them.
Yeah.
So okay. Well, we have some fascinating topics here, Chad. We see Lao Tzu once again curious about how to handle animosity while at the same time trying to keep one's humanity intact. Lao Tzu goes deep this time. It seems that he is saying at the fundamental level that even in military thinking, make no enemies. All I can say to this is, wow. But I'm led to this critical thinking question. Can we oppose someone or something without making them into the enemy? Another way to ask this, when we make an enemy on the outside with all the hatred, disdain, and urges to harm or kill, have we not identified with an enemy already residing within? We were not born bound by this enemy. So how did that inner enemy get there? Did I have anything to do with its appearance and abiding presence? What happens if I don't pay attention to this enemy? Taoism, which is a spirituality about ultimate freedom, does shine the spotlight on attending to this possible captivity to hatred. What if, when we see or identify enemies without, are we merely getting triggered by the enemy within? Enemies that we psychologically and unconsciously project onto some alleged enemy without? Maybe, as in my case, one dog really scared me when I was 3 years old, and now I am still guarded around dogs because I retain this fear that guides my paths around dogs. As with dogs, so too with people, situations, and the stories that we tell ourselves about how the world works. When we consider someone or their thinking as duped or dangerous or disgustingly devilish even, maybe we are already on some imaginary battlefield with lowered ceiling perspectives, starved of options for redemptive action. When we belittle, have we become littler ourselves, smaller? Is this the genesis of how we begin to think of the world as divided into thems and us's on either side, enemies versus friends, and other artificial divisions you may know about?
Those who go to war form themselves into columns, equip themselves with weapons, and advance against the enemy. But when the sage goes to war, he acts as if columns did not exist, armor did not exist, weapons did not exist, as if enemies did not exist. Wu Ching.
That quote always blows me up. One translator, William Martin, says quite brilliantly in the last line of his verse, "If two forces meet, the one who has no enemy will surely triumph." And again, I'm just going, wow. Can you imagine a soldier receiving this instruction from military commanders? It's like the truest military strategy is a true repentance of one's hatred, a hatred that manifests first from within. What if we only see our outside enemies, but with eyes that we have cultivated so carefully in how to see those enemies? Lao Tzu teaches that the making of enemies, emphasis on the making of enemies, is but the re-wounding of self within. And making war on the outside is only the bitter fruit of carrying on war inside. No, Lao Tzu says, the warrior who has not made an enemy lasts. Really, Lao Tzu? What did Lao Tzu know? For his is not a popular view of confrontation in the West. His is a view generated by generations of martial arts practitioners. That view is well described in Sun Tzu's The Art of War, which was already in circulation in China when Tao Te Ching was written. The Art of War is a Chinese military treatise, still influential today, that teaches how and why victory in conflict absolutely hinges upon self-preparation and self-knowledge. So hatred, Belittling and enemy maintenance only obscures your strategic goals. The purpose of an enemy is not to destroy them, but to identify them in yourself. And then you can compassionately work with the enemy inside first, before lobbing or shooting weapons at a visible enemy without. Sun Tzu said that the better army's obligation is to consider the invading forces as guests. Get that, guests. Considered one of history's finest military analyses. If you haven't picked up this amazing work, it can be found free online. Ursula K. Le Guin's translation of Tao Te Ching and her footnote at verse 69 echoes Sun Tzu.
A piece of sound tactical advice which leads to a profound moral warning. The prize thrown away by the aggressor is compassion. The yielder, the griever, the mourner keeps the prize. The game is loser take all.
So in essence, the radical view of war referenced in Tao Te Ching and taught in the art of war and in martial arts is this: whoever would self-amputate their inborn, natural sense of compassion would sever themselves from their best, quote, weapon, unquote. Compassion extended to your opponent is integral to a military mindset and heart set. There, in the enemy's face, we see but our own face. And let this be a warning to us all, especially those of us not daily engaged in military or martial arts. There's a lesson here. No matter who we are, when we take sides and start to belittle, disparage, or make fun of whatever and whomever is on the other side, even if you're on a playground, we have already lost. We've made room within for alien, harmful forces that colonize us, and to which we offer rent-free space in our head or heart. Why haven't we evicted this force already?
When you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, are you listening?
Back in 1986, when I lived in Washington, D.C., the late Archbishop of Cape Town, South Africa, Desmond Tutu, the moral conscience of a South Africa that still practiced an unrepentant apartheid, came to a daily protest outside the South African embassy in Washington. I was in attendance that day. I remember him turning towards the embassy building, and with a bullhorn he addressed those inside this way.
You inside, do you hear me? You have lost already. Do you understand what that means? You on the inside have already lost, and we on the outside have won. We all know how this struggle for black freedom and liberation will turn out, for God is on the side of the oppressed. It's not, we shall win. Oh no, we have already won. Only you have just not realized it yet. We outsiders have, and we know the future. We are the future. Yeah.
Then Tutu did this amazing thing. He next turned toward us protesters of apartheid and then said, quite soberly,
You outside the embassy, do you hear me? You have the victory already. Do you understand what that means? It means you have not belittled your cause with hatred of the other side. You have not besmirched your ethics by imitating the very hatreds that you protest. Remember, we fight and struggle with different weapons. Reconciliation is our tactic, our strategy. We are not here to vanquish. We are not doing what we do to make enemies. Do not dehumanize yourselves by practicing the same hatred that you despise. Save yourselves from the ethically defenseless adoption of the evils you abhor. For if you do not, when you assume leadership in the new South Africa, you will have to keep fighting the hatred and belittlement and resentment that you have kept alive. True peace begins within. Do not give over to hatred.
Chad, this was a electric moment for me in my life to hear this. But does this bring up any comments or stories or teachings that you come across?
Yeah, well, first of all, Mark, I just can't imagine being there in that place, and it's really an honor to be in your presence as someone who was there, and to get to know you, and to see you embody this and carry this on, and to look at our cultural moment now. We sure need this spirit big time in the empire that is the United States of America. We need this. And it does bring back a personal story in my own life of being a pastor of a church in 2016 after the November election, and being called there in June of that year prior to the election. I was there 4 years, and really it was just a slow burn from that election, as I created some enemies myself who did not like how I was engaging with the cultural moment. And these enemies, so to speak, became vicious, and I would even say wicked, as they came after me and my family, and going through 2 ecclesiastical investigations, being called a heretic, getting hate mail, anonymous hate mail, seeing what this verse 69 is talking about, seeing the tactic of divide and conquer and hate. It became one of the most devastating times of my life. And in fact, House of Mercy eventually would grow out of the ashes of that. But what this verse reminds me is of that time when, looking at the face of my enemies, who made it very clear that they were my enemies, they hated me. A grace from God was, and probably my own insecurity and lack of self-confidence and an unfortunate ability to self-abandon and believe my critics and what they're saying. It caused me to investigate myself. And as you're saying here, look at the enemy that's within. And I saw the same thing. I saw the same impulse, the same instinct to respond to hate with hate, and to respond to evil with evil. I don't think these people were evil, but they certainly were projecting evil onto me. And again, by God's grace, I did not want to be like them. And it offered a time for me to really work on that, and do this inner work within of trying to be different than that. I'm thankful for that. I'm grateful for that. It certainly came through a lot of pain and suffering. But that's what comes to my mind as I see this, and I'm grateful that I did not respond, for the most part, I don't think, to this sort of spirit with a like-minded spirit. And so all those thoughts come back here.
Thank you very much. There's one piece of word nerdery in this verse, which I think goes to what you've just said, Chad, but it also is the very word upon which I think the verse turns or is hinged. It's this word. So when we read in my translation, there is no calamity greater than belittling one's enemy, the word for belittling is Ching, which here means to intend derision towards your perceived enemy. That is a belittling, condescension, disdainfulness for, and making fun of the very thing that is a human being, because what you're trying to do is dethrone your opponent from their rightful place as a human being down to something parasitic, which we often call something like a cockroach. For in most warfare, the enemy is almost always demoted like that. Whether it's a national enemy or a coworker, a distant relative, or the last person who cut us off in traffic, we learn oh so carefully how to disdain them. And we want to talk about them in disdainful terms. Why? Because it makes it easier for us to self-justify ourselves and criticize others and belittle others. And eventually, if we belittle them enough, you get to a point where you could, kill them, or at least their reputations. And we use the same words that we maintain for insects. We want to exterminate them. When we belittle or hate, we render one's opponent as something unrecognizable, a warped human, and thus worthless in our hearts and minds. We want to wound or kill the opponent, not just physically with a military sword, but morally with an almost religious scorn. They deserve it. And to exterminate your sorry-ass enemy goes the sorry-ass logic of our cultures. That extermination somehow does the world good. Tao Te Ching concludes otherwise. Belittling an enemy is the worst tactic or strategy. It means you lose your three treasures taught in verse 67.
First, unconditional mercy. Second, simplicity of wants. Third, humility.
Lose those, and it is we who walk around wounded, belittled, warped, and devastated, unrecognizably human.
Anger is an acid that can do more harm to the vessel in which it's stored than to anything on which it is poured. Mark Twain.
For here is the dark truth. Sometimes when we disdain someone and keep on hating them, they often don't even know about it. They're ignorant of our suffering, totally oblivious. Meanwhile, we cannibalize ourselves with hate. Now, I have a story here. Do you have a story for this?
I want to hear yours while I pop open a beer.
Okay. My story happened about 15 years ago. I was doing some writing in Asheville for a weekly newspaper, a spirituality story. And I had done a story on why people of faith should not kill ever. I said, I just want to start a conversation. And my 600 words appeared in that local paper. And then the next week, somebody close in my college community at Mars Hill lost their son in Iraq. And I was called into my supervisor's office and read the Riot Act. And I was made to feel humiliated. And I left livid with anger, for there's no place to take it. And I lived for years making every day these gigabytes upon gigabytes of revenge videos in my brain. And every day they get better because I was the producer and the actor and the director and the production manager. And they got better and better every day. But I kept those videos, those gigabytes of videos in my head, and it did something to me. Then one day I was teaching in South Korea a course on Buddhism to Buddhists, and we were talking about the effect of karma. And I realized right there, and it staggered me, I realized what I had been doing with this one person. They did not even know my suffering pain. And yet here I was every day making these horrible videos about them in which I came out on top. I'd lost my three treasures. I'd lost my humanity. This person didn't even know, didn't even care. And that's when the Buddha saved me. When we belittle an enemy or plan revenge, we only demonstrate how they still live inside us as things we maintain, give rent-free space in our hearts, and they influence us, even though they be dead. Truly, the most dangerous enemy is the one unrecognized, the one in the mirror.
I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hate so stubbornly because they sense once hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with pain. James Baldwin.
And #zombie. Other translators have rendered there's no calamity greater than belittling one's enemies in these 5 ways. And Chad and I are going to switch the microphone off here.
There is no greater misfortune than underestimating your enemy. Underestimating your enemy means thinking that he is evil. Thus you destroy your 3 treasures and become an enemy yourself. Stephen Mitchell.
There is no greater calamity than disregarding the enemy. Disregarding your enemy brings you close to the death of what you treasure. From Alan Sheets and Barbara Tovey.
Advancing against the enemy where there is no enemy. There is no calamity greater than lightly engaging in war. To do that is near losing the gentleness which is so precious. James Legg.
When you defend yourself without any show of force, you give your opponent nothing to fight. Attacking an enemy you've underestimated is a costly mistake. Michael Hogan.
Underestimating your enemy means losing your greatest assets. Chris Corrigan.
With what we just read in mind, understand that entering conflicts that you don't understand is bad. Worse than bad. Engaging in conflicts where you don't understand yourself is the single worst tragedy. But it is avoidable. What do you think, Chad?
Yeah, Mark, I do have some thoughts on this as it relates to our cultural moment that we're in now. I know no other way than just to be frank. And again, I think the United States has always been an empire, and in large part the chickens are coming home to roost. And I think my disdain and my anger and the enemy to me actually is not, it's not the president, it's not those in office, it is other so-called Christians, my tribe, people who are doing the gaslighting and people who they're not following the Christ I know. They're not following the way. And it pisses me off when I hear them say that they are. And it couldn't be more different than the God I follow, the way that I see in Christ. And I think that we can and should, in fact, say something. And there's a way, I think this verse in the Tao Te Ching is so informative for showing us how to have this balance of not responding in kind, not responding to dehumanization with more dehumanization, not responding to hate with hate, but still resisting and still saying something as a way of defending what I would call the kingdom of God, which is this ultimate reality, this alternative society that Christians are, in my view, are supposed to be living in and a part of. There's a way to call out the difference of that and to harness our anger even in a way where we're looking in the mirror. We're battling our own demons with this. We're not going to take up arms. We're not going to be violent with our speech or our actions. Instead, we are going to intentionally and strategically say something and respond with love, heaping coals upon their heads, as Jesus says. And this is a call to action during this time. And I think this verse speaks to that and models for us and shows us the way to respond that is with a, as you say, with a different weapon, but is no less a weapon, and is no less a response and a resistance. And I think the difference is we're not defending ourselves. I'm not defending myself. I am defending the way. And how dare you say that your way of hate is the way of Christ or the way of the Tao? How dare you?
Or the way the universe operates.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. Exactly. Yes.
When you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, are you listening?
The last line of our verse is this.
When two equally matched forces face off, the strategist of compassion prevails.
Perhaps the most efficient way to clarify this last line is just to read several other translations' last lines. As we read, Chad and I will emphasize a word or phrase that others have used for, quote, strategists of compassion. 1. Therefore, when two sides take arms against each other, it is the side with the most reluctance which wins. Keith Seddon.
2. In the beginning, aggressiveness seems to win, but at the end, he who is compassionate wins. Octavian Sarbator.
3. If matched armies encounter one another, the one who does so in sorrow is sure to conquer. D.T. Suzuki and Paul Karus.
4. Therefore, when two equally matched armies meet, it is the man of sorrow who wins. Lin Yutang.
5. When equal forces meet in battle, victory will go to the one that enters with the greatest sorrow. J.H. MacDonald.
6. Therefore, when two armies encounter each other, the side that laments war will win. Henry Way.
7. When opposing troops resist each other, the one stung by grief will be the victor. Tam Gibbs.
8. When opposing armies clash, those who cry win. Dao Huang.
And finally, number 9. Thus it happens that when opposing forces meet in battle, he who feels the pity of assuredly conquers. Walter Gorn Old. Let's conclude. Those who suffer even self-inflicted wounds can recover. Those who suffer by toxic thoughts about opponents are in the absolute best seats in the house to realize in your own seat, in your own person, that fighting an enemy means there's something already alien within us. We can maintain this alien something within and become all self-righteous with a certitude and arrogance that more often than not ends up energizing the enemy all the more. For in our pushing, in our ego extending itself, we integrate our egos and control freaking tendencies, providing more oxygen for the enemy. So here's my last teaching on this. When one feels led to confront someone else's flaws, even someone else's aggression, remember, it is our own flaws and aggressions that are first triggered. Essentially, we project onto, quote, the other, unquote, our own defects and merely attack someone's perceived shortcomings with our actual defects. That's not battle, that's foolishness. When we disconnect from who we are, that is, from our original instructions for peace, we forget we are made of treasures for treasuring. We have superpowers, treasures deep for empowering anyone, everyone, anytime. These 3 treasures are
unconditional mercy, simplicity of wants, humility.
These are our deep-rooted core, our original fuel. Tao, through its early retirement teaching of Wu Wei, teaches a less insane way to change the world. Regard ourselves and our opponents as one single entity, where when we do to others, we are first doing to ourselves. Practicing acts of compassion towards ourselves softens the hardened places within. Guantanamos, concentration camp, dark renditions, stored hatreds we bring out like food, and we then make into a meal. These all originate within us first. So do not give them that first breath of oxygen or that ledge to stand on. I wrote a short poem for this verse. It goes like this. The first wound is always within, a blade of fear, a shield of pride. We call them enemy, but oh, isn't the battle already begun?
Step inward, not forward. Lay down your arms of scorn. The softest warrior wins the war, not by striking, but by seeing.
No foe greater than the one in the mirror, no victory sweeter than surrendering hate. Mercy is the sharpest tactic, compassion the undefeated force.
So bless even the hands that shake with anger, the hearts that close like fists. For war ends where kindness begins, and the strongest hand leaves no scar.
Thanks. Homework. You know, in your life as well as mine, there is no shortage of people around us or in the news or in a foreign country. Consider one real person who is the easiest for you to disdain, dismiss, and demean. They are our test for Tao's power and Tao's authenticity. What happens if we ask the universe in the ways we pray that this person be at peace, be whole, be human? Maybe the universe will answer the prayer we pray for the other person, but the universe is more likely to turn that prayer upside down That is, when we treat the enemy as human, it's ourselves. It is ourselves that get humanized. Just suck on that for a while. The first casualty in war is a truth. That is, the conflicted truth about ourselves. Finally, our custom is to end with a family-friendly rendition of today's verse. I urge you to sit down with a young person and ask them about this. Verse 69, befriend the enemy within, defeat the enemy without. The best fighters say, it's better to defend than attack. It's better to take a step back than push forward.
Win without showing or showing weapons. Beat your opponent without a fight that gets you both dirty, inside and out. What if your enemy might be within? The biggest mistake is looking down on your opponent. That's when you forget your best self.
When two sides are equally strong, the one with kindness and compassion always wins. Thank you for listening to this free podcast, which is a production of many. Thank you, Chad, for donating your time to join me on this podcast. We spotlight Audrey Davis for her artwork and Molly Hartwell for her free use of her song and voice. Fortress Press holds the copyright for quotations from a Doubted Ching translation used here. May your day begin in heaven's peace and become the inner wombs to give birth to compassion, or the labs where we practice compassion with our demons within.